before we sort of do a refresh on what that is, let's do that next slide. And what we want for today and for the hour that we have here, and then anytime that you all want to ask questions when we're out in the lobby, is like first do this refresh on the study. Just like, what was this? What did you learn? And where do you think we should go next, right? And us really asking each other that question, where do we want to go next? That discussion part is the meat of today. It's just us listening and us capturing your feedback as best as we can. And then third is next steps, which are also pretty open-ended. We have some ideas about what to do next and how to do it. A lot of those ideas are people-based and process-based, so it's not this very specific grant program named this, run out of this office. It is instead, how do we organize? And what kind of mechanisms of communication and relationship building are we going to build over the coming years, so that when we want to do something, we can speak with one voice and do it collectively and do it successfully. So cool, let's jump into the study. Study was like a tale of two tales. There was the quantitative data, which we got from Michael. He's the expert. And then there were the interviews, and we conducted these interviews across all of these different sectors, not knowing what we would hear, right? We didn't know if people would tell us the same thing or totally different things. And there were similarities across all of these sectors. And a lot of the similarities were like the pain points. Where does it hurt, right? We were surprised to be hearing from video game companies who were telling us the same things as like film schools, telling us the same things as some of our exhibition partners, film festivals, movie theaters, things like that. So let's go to the next slide, because then there was this economic stuff that we looked at. And when we looked at the data, like the quantitative data, like jobs and revenue, based on the interviews we had just conducted, we were expecting that at best the industry is like staying the same in terms of employment, or staying the same in terms of number of people working here, and probably not too impressive in terms of the amount of money that our industry was bringing to the state of Colorado. The numbers said basically the opposite. They said, you've got a lot of people working here already. They're bringing in the folks who work in film, TV, media, hi guys. The folks who work in film, television, media in Colorado, according to the Census Bureau?
Several federal agencies and state agencies.
So the jobs and revenue data told us something that felt at first like the opposite of what we were hearing in the interviews, and we couldn't figure that out. Because we were talking to people all over the state, and they said, this is pretty hard, I feel pretty siloed, I don't know, I couldn't find a job, so I started my own company. I don't know how to run a company, so now I'm trying to learn how to build a company, right? And so we were trying to figure out how these two things could be true. And what we did was we took everyone's, hey Ronna, we took everyone's feedback, and we sort of, we were looking for a way to categorize it all, so that what people told us could be reflected in a way that was like systematic, right? And so on the next slide, we have what we call the findings, which are really categories of findings, right? We have this idea of silos. Whatever it is you work on, whether it's creative, whether it's advocacy work, whether it's organizing, whether it's trying to build jobs, you're finding that even when there are organizations, right, and ostensibly organizations that are designed to create collaborative environments, the organizations are often siloed from each other, right? And if you don't involve, if you're not a part of an organization, then you're really feeling a lot of siloing, right? The next is representation. We heard this from folks in northern Colorado, folks up here, folks down in Pueblo, folks on the western slope, and then folks from different demographic backgrounds. So women and people of color were much less likely to feel that they were represented in positions of leadership, much less likely to tell us that they had relationships with people who were running companies and providing them with opportunities, et cetera. Talent retention was another big one. So people would try to start a company, and it was really, really hard, and so they moved to LA, and instead of taking the company with them, they just dissolve the company and then go work for some existing company in LA or New York, right? And from the standpoint of the schools, from the city and state agencies, from all the folks, all the entities that are there to really identify and support people who are here on the ground, they were saying the same thing, which was there's this giant sucking sound, and it makes us kind of scared and nervous. We don't know how to keep people, right? And the artists we talked to, writers, directors, said, we feel constant pressure at all times between staying here in Colorado, the place that we love and the communities that we love, working with the people that we love, or just packing our bags, up and going. where the job thing can at least be figured out, right? You might work at the bottom of a totem pole, right, on a big set, but you're working on a big set, and it's a ladder that you can climb. And we don't have a lot of those big ladders here, right? So the next is physical infrastructure. In terms of physical footprints, let's take Fort Collins as an example. If I'm a musician, there's the music district, right? What's the music district for film? What's the music district for multidisciplinary arts, right? Do we have physical footprints, not just for the exhibition of film in Colorado, but for the filmmakers themselves, right? Other cities often have these physical spaces. Sometimes they're run for profit, sometimes they're non-profit, but in cities where things start to catch fire and start getting built, things start to change, it's because there's a place where people are gathering on a regular basis for more than just the consumption of a finished film, right? So, physical infrastructure, where do I go? Online infrastructure, what a dry and boring name to call something that could be really, really important. So, what's an example of online infrastructure? Let's say our hopes and dreams come true, what we think we want. Let's say Netflix and Hulu and Amazon and Apple all come to Colorado, and they're like, thank you so much for passing that mega incentives bill, right? That's awesome. We are so excited to make our next 10 years worth of movies and TV shows in your state. Where's the list of your most talented crew members? Who are some of the writers and directors that we want to talk to get them staffed up into writers' rooms, right? Now that's like best case scenario, is people asking us for lists and organization and a database and information that we don't have organized in a centralized place that's easy to access. Now, what's the simplest version of online infrastructure? It's a spreadsheet, right? So the most advanced version of online infrastructure is a searchable, sortable, filterable database of who's working here, right? So that's the pie in the sky version, and oops, we don't actually have that. But in the more immediate sense, we do have production companies that come here. They shoot smaller stuff, but they do say, who do you got? Who's trained? I need a second AC, right? I need someone for craft services who's done a feature-length picture before, right? Who do we got? And it's the film industry, right? So the systems of information sharing are always informal. They're always relational. That's not just a Colorado thing. But the more organized we are, the more we can actually identify and champion the careers of our filmmakers. Because when we don't do that, right, it's just relational. It's just the who's who and who's in the know and who's not. Who's on the inside, who's on the outside. And this is the kind of thing that exacerbates representation, right? When you don't actually have databases with names and faces, skill sets and CVs, right? Representation and the lack thereof gets exacerbated. It's a systemic problem that has a cosmetic symptom that we see. So, support programs is the next. Support programs can be creative, they can be financial. A support program can be fellowships, residencies, writers' rooms, right? Support programs can be project labs, right? Where you are being paired with a mentor. You've applied to a program, you have your script, you've never made a script before, film before, right? Doesn't mean you don't deserve to, right? What you're deserving of is people who see you and support you. And so where do you go for that right now? What are our fellowships? What are our residencies? What are our project labs, right? The other form of support program, you can guess, is a grant program, right? That would be the plainest example of what a support program might look like. The more involved examples would be ones that involve private capital often, right? Now, most of our films are not going to make a whole bunch of money. They're independent films, and we're often making them for the first, second, or third time in our career. But at a project market, a pitch panel, right? Sheffield, England, once a year, funders, agents, and others from the industry descend on Sheffield, England. And they meet at tables, and they sort of speed date. The funders, the agents, people from WME and CAA, people like I did at my previous job. I would go through a PDF of all the filmmakers who submitted to Sheffield DocFest. I would identify all the ones that were a potential match for the company that I was representing, the money that I was representing, and then for a week, I would sit and meet face-to-face with all of these filmmakers. And even if the project they were pitching me was not something that my organization was going to want to support, we now had that relationship. And I was going to ask to keep in touch with them and to track their career so that when that next project came along that we did want to support, we were in each other's pocket. We had that relationship, right? So I get told by people with lots of money, the city and the state, for instance, city of Denver, state of Colorado, that giving grants to filmmakers feels prohibitive to them because they give $5,000 to a painter and the painting is done, right? A filmmaker comes with a $300,000 project and looks at a $5,000 check and is like, okay, I've got a bit of a gap, right? I've got some more to go, right? And it makes the funder feel less useful and less valued to us as artists, right? And so project markets and pitch panels, things that you essentially host and invite in people from the industry with money, is a way of stretching that dollar. Because the city of Denver and the state of Colorado can't fully fund all of our films. What they can do is they can host an event once a year. It's well within their capacity too, right? And they can work with Series Fest or Denver Film, they can work with WIFMCO, they can work with CFEA, they can work with any number of organizations on the ground to simply host an event where they're inviting and providing hospitality to people from the industry. So that's an example of a support program as well. You might have seen an elephant in the room at the end of this list. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to talk about incentives. So, talk about life lessons and the things that are within our control in the immediate and things that we can organize and become effective at in the long term, but not confusing those two categories of things, right? So I have a high level of confidence that if we wanted to create a pitch panel or a project market within the next 3 years, we collectively, like in this room, could do that if we invested ourselves in that being our goal, right? And from that, we might get the visibility of, oh my God, like Netflix is in Denver this weekend to like review the projects of Colorado filmmakers. That visibility and what state legislators start noticing and the governor's office starts noticing starts making the conversation about incentives way easier because we have visibility, right? That's within our control, is building things that can become successful and build visibility that make the other things easier. The challenge of incentives from an organizing standpoint, from a community organizing standpoint, is that it's clearly the thing. It's the transformative thing. It's the lever you pull, the money comes down from on heaven, you know, and everything changes, right? Now, how it changes, we can ask folks in New Mexico, we can ask folks in Georgia, folks in Texas. How it changes things differs based on what was built prior to those incentives coming in, right? New Mexico didn't have job training in place before the incentives. They didn't have a database or a Rolodex of all of the filmmakers who were ready to work on day one in their industry, right? And so the industry has parachuted in, and it's growing, and they can now build those pipelines. But for so many of New Mexicans who were in the film industry prior to incentives, you can imagine waiting for so long for the incentives to finally come, and when they do, you're not the one getting the job on the set, right? How that must feel, right? Mm-hmm. That will not always be the case. Like I said, they're now building in those programs, right? And it's happening. But the main point I want to make about incentives is that it's not within our immediate control. We can do a lot of advocacy and a lot of organizing, and we can go and help contribute to writing better and more significant bills that better serve us, that are more appealing and more likely to pass the legislature, right? We can do messaging, we can knock on doors and make phone calls, right? There are folks in this room who I know have done quite a bit of that, right? What we want to make sure that we're doing is that work collectively, whoever wants to be doing it, that they are supported, and that everyone who wants to participate in passing more generous long-term incentives is supported in doing so, has the information they need to do so effectively, right? And that we're not working at the expense of one another. What we don't want is if I'm trying to build a project market and Michael really wants incentives, and so I speak up and I'm like, I think we should have a project market. He's like, we can't, it doesn't make any sense. John, shut up. There's no point in building anything or doing anything until there's incentives, because incentives, as we know, are the transformative thing, right? He's not wrong about them being transformative, but he's just kept me from building something that could help us pass incentives in the years to come. Right? And so what we talk about is taking a yes and approach to incentives so that we don't do this kind of tribal, balkanized warfare with one another, depending on who is wanting to build what. Understanding it as positive sum, right? We're all working in the same direction, or we all can be working in the same direction. So, next slide. To that end, right? If we're going to have a strategy, it needs to be a collective strategy. It needs to be a long-term strategy. I think collective is really the operative word there. Strategic might also be an operative word. What I want and saying what I want is not strategic. me listening to what people want, and then listening to legislators about why they've been on the fence up until now, and figuring out what they want, and then making those two things harmonize, that's strategic. Taking a yes and approach to incentives, so that while I'm working on incentives, someone else can be building a Made in Colorado campaign where there's a stamp or a badge of every single piece of media and storytelling. It's made in Colorado, right? I'm not gonna get in their way, they're not gonna get in mine. We are actually, in fact, helping one another's causes. Because the next time I talk to a legislator, I'm gonna be like, nice tote bag. I see that it's a Made in Colorado tote bag. Cool logo, right? I'm here from the film industry. Instead of what happens today, which is, hi, yes, we spoke 2 weeks ago, I'm from the film industry. Yes, we have a film industry here, right? I'm reintroducing my entire occupation over and over again, right? Prioritizing equitable representation. So this is something that my nonprofit is committed to as a starting place, because if and when we build something ourselves, the folks who normally get overlooked, whether it's geographic, whether it's racial, whether it's gender, the folks who normally get overlooked, if they're at the center of our project, they are in central positions of leadership and involvement from the very beginning, right? Then we're not going to build an industry that looks like everyone else's. Our stories are not going to sound and feel like everyone else's, right? It is precisely the voices that get overlooked that tell us who we are. And if they are not included at day one, we are going to spend a lot of time backtracking and trying to correct those foundational mistakes, and it's like trying to fix the foundation of your house, right? And so prioritizing equitable representation, even in who we are inviting to the table, just to have conversations like these, right? So, leveraging existing strengths. As that economic data showed us, something is going really well. The people in this room and the people outside this room in Colorado's film industry are doing something really, really well, because they're bringing in over $1 billion in revenue, goods, and services to the state of Colorado every single year, without visibility, without campaigns, without good communication. Nobody knows that, right? But all of that hard work, all of that blood, sweat, and tears is already benefiting the state. And so where is that work being done? If it's being done in commercial video production, if it's being done in documentary filmmaking, if it's being done in exhibition in our film schools, wherever it's being done, taking those as our starting blocks. Instead of saying, Atlanta did this cool thing that has nothing to do with us. It worked for them, let's try it here, right? Let's be the next event, let's be the next, right? Being the next anything isn't a prize worth fighting for, and this can be a life's work. So I want to make sure that we're fighting for things that are meaningful to us, specific to us, and based on our existing strengths and who we are to begin with, right? So securing shared physical infrastructure. This is about how and where do we meet. It's just about people. How frequently do you interact with someone in your community by surprise, right? I drive long distances to have meaningful conversations with people on purpose. There are so many moments throughout the course of a day when I have a question for someone that I was just talking to, right? And if I could just pull them into a meeting, say, I'm headed to this meeting, could you just, those conversations, the efficiencies that get unlocked when we're near one another, when we're around one another, are unbelievable. And it's hard in a Western state. I'm from Arizona. We have similar urban landscape of profound sprawl, and decentralized urban. It's hard to overstate what happens when creative, passionate, hardworking people are near one another, right? When we have shared physical infrastructure. You can see it in places like the music industry. What a music venue offers is not just a place to consume the finished product. I can walk into a music venue during the day, I will sit at a bar, order a drink, and musicians over the course of that day will come in and come through. It's a water hole, it's a gathering place. I'm gonna get to know so much about an industry when there's a physical place I can go and we can talk to each other, right? Either that or Maya, maybe we allow people to just talk during movies so we can have those conversations while movies. It has to be one or the other. Financial and creative support programs we talked about, and then focusing on when we launch a program, when we launch an initiative, being able to measure, did we retain talent, right? Right now, we don't even track it. We don't even track it. Now, I'm glad I don't work in higher education. That's a difficult job in a very difficult industry that's becoming more difficult. So it is not about saying woulda, shoulda, coulda, right? It's instead saying, if at some point in the near future our film schools can tell me who of their alumni from the last 5 years are still in town, are still in the state, then I have a way of measuring our progress on that front, right? Without the data, it's just anecdote. Like, it's just anecdote. And we can't pass legislation and make change showing up at the doors of our legislators with just anecdotes, right? I know that. That's right. Cool. Next slide. Great. So that's all the yammer. Okay, good. I think maybe you start with a few questions for us, and then we just open it up to the floor, if that sounds good.
Yeah, well, you had, for Michael specifically, I think you had an idea of what we could ask him. Can you remind me? Oh, yeah. I know. Okay, Michael, compared to the music industry, what stands out in the film industry that you can recommend we look at in order to make our film industry here as successful as the music industry is in Colorado?
Yeah, the one thing that kind of boggles my mind is incentives. It's like in the music industry, it'd be comparable to saying we're only going to fund major label projects, which just isn't the way to do things. You should really take if you're going to subsidize an industry and help support it, you should look at like what Canada does, and they have a great finance program that looks at all bands and decides which band is or artist is meritorious enough that they should receive financing. And if financing helps, you know, these bands are able to go on tour. It's like all of a sudden you see the Arcade Fire, you see, you know, this incredibly great noise rock band Mets. The only reason they got to be so huge, because it's such a niche genre, is they had a lot of money behind them from the Canadian government. And then now they're selling at much higher levels. I can never figure out why, and I was a business executive at CAA for years. I can never figure out why there was so much focused on incentives in the film industry that went to these huge projects, as opposed to music, where you can do many little things. You can support an all ages DIY venue, and that's going to perhaps impact your music industry much more than giving money to record a major label album. We just look at Seattle and the Vera project. Lots of great bands have come through there. So I would say it's definitely something that, like John was saying, really looking at spaces, programs that, yeah, you do need, you know, when I worked in Hollywood, it was always the mantra of, you're always gonna have Hollywood. And it's true, Hollywood's not going anywhere. But you need the ladders to go up to Hollywood. So when you have a great project come here that shoots, well, we have a lot of homegrown talent that learns how to be a second AC. They learn how to be a grip, things like that. Whereas you also need, though, what are those people's projects working on? How are they going to go up the ladder? So that's what I've always thought, the infrastructure that people don't really think about, and not just focusing. Definitely focus on bigger projects, but also think about, well, how can we take out of this millions of dollars we're offering, $100,000 and to create a space for filmmaking, things like that.
And Michael and I argue about that all the time. He's an economist, so he always wins. But where we agree and where we often end in those conversations is taking a bottom up instead of top down approach, right? Puts our work in our control, right? And then second, if you only have a pot, our pot of incentive money is very small, very, very small compared to other states. Thinking about how to take that pot and stretch the dollar as far as possible. What kind of investment actually makes a transformative long-term impact, rather than maybe one of the projects that we support with our tiny little pot this year will be the one that just goes huge, right? And it's just like everyone loves Colorado film because this one movie. It's rare that that would ever happen, but there are ways to be more strategic in our thinking of long-term transformative impact.
Yeah. Well, and I know that, like, with the incentives, they do try to give a certain amount to Colorado productions and things like that, but maybe it's more about suggesting a tiered system where it's like this amount of money goes to this tier of filmmakers, this amount goes to this. And then I think also in the continuation of filmmaking, like being someone who makes films, like to continue that support to help with the marketing and the publicity and the like screening it places, I think would also be really helpful.
You can make a movie that gets a broader audience for less money if you invest in the development of that movie. You can take a movie that is finished and have it do much better because you invest in its marketing, right? And so thinking about the pipeline of the film and what types of entities or institutions might help some of that incentive money go into more than just craft services. Your script's already been written and we're not giving you marketing funds, right?
Yeah.
There are more rigorous and creative ways we can think about where to put a dollar that might go further. That's all.
And we can open this up to everyone too. What do you guys see as a need that we need to? What do we need to continue moving the state forward in a positive way for filmmakers? And if you want to say your name, those of you who arrived a little late, then everyone.
All right. Hi, I'm Kate. I'm a blogger, and I think honestly, what might help most with making film more accessible and more successful is something like Fort Collins's Art to Live grants program, where I would love to make a film and shoot it with people, but I have a day job, so I gotta like schedule my weekends and then hope my actors don't get COVID, stuff like so.
Yeah.
It's if I didn't have if I was able to work 4 days a week instead of 5 days a week and still be able to buy groceries, that would be something that I could see helping a lot of people. But I realize not everyone is in the same boat.
No, that's beautiful. The person who sort of inspired, created, and now runs the Art to Live program is here with us today.
Yay!
So if you have questions about that program, it's a great example of the kind of like very creative thinking about solving concrete problems with something that hasn't existed before, right?
And the goal is definitely to get it to be statewide at some point.
Nice.
Yeah, and if something that if you had said like, what is Atlanta doing? Let's do that, right? You would have never.
So one thing, Eric Forbes, mostly documentary filmmaker here in town. One thing that I'm kind of curious on like an economics perspective is like creating an actual consumer market for independent film. Like I think if we, it's great that we could try to look to the government and try to get money from them, but how can we make our own money? How can we make money and become sustainable and build a market for independent film? There's a market for independent music. People go to independent music theaters all the time. Why aren't we having, filling in theaters for our independent films that are made and showcases and stuff like that actually can come back to the people that made them? Oh, I got my thing shown at a festival or an event or did a private screening, but you don't really get any of that money back towards you, right? Like how, I'm just curious, like, do you have any ideas about how we can try to set something up like that for filmmakers?
The consumer market is a bit like our housing market, where it's like they're a single standalone family house, and that's like YouTube, or there's just like skyscrapers, right? We often have a missing middle. And so there's a lot of folks, some of them here in Colorado, who have been talking about how to build the types of platforms and mechanisms, and even like physical spaces, wherein that missing middle could be built in, so that it's not something you're putting online in an ocean of other content for free, right? And difficult to monetize. And it's not just, praying that the gatekeepers at Amazon let you in, right? So that's first, is you're not imagining the problem. Second is, most film festivals are made and started by filmmakers who have similar frustrations, right? How do we share our work with the public in a way that better benefits the filmmakers, right? And so I have found that in my conversations with people who run film festivals, that they're some of the most thoughtful and creative people. And talking to distributors, like a lot of boutique indie distributors started themselves because they were frustrated by the film distribution process, right? They become part of the ecosystem and they're like, oh, it costs a lot of money to market a film, right? Like, if I want anyone to watch this thing, right? But talking to those people helps me understand what is, and then holding firm to that frustration of that, like, I feel like we all deserve an audience the way our musician friends do, right? And so what can we create that allows us to interface with the public in a way that is actually like economically sustainable and enriching to ourselves, right? Keep asking that question, because just because what isn't serving that and answering that problem yet doesn't mean it shouldn't be, right? I suspect that we're going to build that middle housing for independent filmmakers in the next like 15, 20 years. LA right now is still trying to figure out what the skyscrapers are going to be for the next 15 to 20 years. And that's going to have a lot of downstream effects on what's possible for indies.
Thank
Such an unenriching answer. I apologize.
There are existing things a little bit too already in the state. Like I think like the Lyric is relatively open to showing your work or working with you, or like Denver Film, the CE Film Center I think is pretty like affordable and also willing to like schedule you in. So there are things I think popping up here and there, and Megan Matusik is creating an online platform as well that's sort of like an indie distribution model. So they're working a little bit.
Yeah. Megan Matusik's company is called NoCo Plus, and is trying to provide exactly that service, which is basically better compensation to indie filmmakers. And yeah, you have exhibition opportunities, right? Like you have very friendly exhibition venues around town. But in terms of sustainable income, like right now, the most successful instances I've seen have been filmmakers building out an audience for themselves as a brand, right? And your followers follow you on whatever platforms you're on. Vimeo, YouTube, you subscribe. Can be Instagram, can be whatever. But that doesn't solve a systemic problem, right?
There are also a few others, like IndieFlix has a distribution arm. Like I made a web series like years ago, and we get like $2 every quarter, you know? It's based on views and like clicks. So there's IndieFlix, I think Seed and Spark has a distribution arm now as well.
Okay.
So there are some things out there.
Yeah. And it's true of most artists too. Like we make stuff for them that they pay us to make, and then we make stuff for ourselves. And sometimes happiness is found in not trying to get the hunting dog to be the lap dog or the lap dog to be the hunting dog, right?
Yeah.
Knowing why you're making a particular project and not asking it to do things that it's not built to do is one of the secrets to happiness, I'm told, which I'm working on.
If you figure that out, let us know.
Exactly.
Yeah, let us all know too.
Exactly. Yeah.
What else? Anything else?
Yeah, I've got a few things, Alexandra. So John, kind of flipping what you talked about in the first bit of helping filmmakers creating this infrastructure. So on the flip side, how can filmmakers best interact with organizations like yours to do the best they can? Because it has to be a dual effort, you know? So that's my first question. The second question is with the, like Born in Colorado like type of branding, or you know, trying to get that. How is that initiative gone, and do you have any further thoughts on fostering that?
Yeah. So the first question is sort of, if I understand correctly, how do independent and individual members of the community get more involved, and how can we get better at that involvement?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is close to my heart, and Elizabeth and I almost started talking about at the beginning of the event. It's, do we need more consolidation of our groups in the state, or do we need groups that are like more tailored to the different communities we have of filmmakers in our state, right? Where you feel a sense of belonging, but you're tiny, right?
Yeah.
I think it's both. I think instead of having one big conglomerate membership organization where everyone pretends to get along and agrees on everything, right? Will never happen anywhere ever. You have partnership, you have collaboration, you have transparency and communication, right? And you have collaboration on issues of long-term strategic organizing that we talked about, right? And so I know who at CFVA to talk to, or who at WIFMCO to talk to when it comes to, let's say, the Made in Colorado campaign. Has the membership of this particular organization been given the opportunity to weigh in on which logo we want for our campaign, right? Like we got the Georgia Peach, the Colorado what, right? Has WIFMCO voted, right? I need to be able to know that, because with my best intentions, I still have to do a lot of digging to find out how people feel about something, right? And in the absence of some democratic republic that we build, you know, right? And it's like, who's your film senator, right? And like they'll vote on your behalf, you know. What we need is to take our existing groups and institutions and be able to get agreement about what do we want to achieve in 2024. Like say one thing and let's focus our efforts on that, right? And then independent filmmakers can have a way of saying, well, there's 3 meetup groups in Northern Colorado, and the statewide group WIFMCO has a Colorado chapter, right? And I've got a regional film commissioner. So those are my touch points. If I'm interested in what everyone wants to do in 2024, I have at least one of 3 places I can go, right? And if you visit all the groups and you attend a happy hour and a meetup of all those different groups and none of them just feel like you, or if you don't just like feel seen and safe and yourself in any of those environments, start your own meetup group, right? That's where we disagree. Yeah.
No, I don't disagree with that. I just think that they all also have to talk to each other. You know, like it can't just be like, I have this group, I have this group, I have this group, and we're all trying to like make the same thing happen. We're all working towards the same goal. So if we don't all get together, like, you know, every quarter or something and have a massive meeting where we all talk about all the things together, then I feel like it's harder
Totally.
to be like, well, I have this group.
Right. And, you know, it's amazing being out of high school and remembering high school and being like, as long as I can graduate, I'll never have to deal with this type of behavior ever again, right? And then we get out of high school and it's like, oh, it's this forever? It's this forever? Right? You know, so words and phrases we try to avoid in strong communities, right?
Yeah.
This group is better than that group, right?
Right.
So it is instead, what does this group do particularly well? What do they want to be the best in the state at? And so when I'm meeting a filmmaker who comes to Cine Fe, which is not a membership organization, right? I meet a filmmaker and they tell me where they're coming from, then I have a sense of, best group in the state for you, maybe this one. Go talk to this person, right? Sometimes it's about fit, but Elizabeth is so spot on that it's also about open communication and feeling like we've got each other's back because we're in the same boat, you know, to really mix metaphors, right? Like, if WIFMCO isn't succeeding, I can't do Cine Fe. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Same with CFEA, same with the film office. Like, I'm rooting for all of them, but I do think it starts with openness, transparency, communication on an ongoing basis. So my favorite thing about your question is we need events like this on a regular, rolling basis, wherever 2 or 3 may gather in the name of community solidarity, right? That having that built in as muscle memory is what we can't have. Here's a symptom of when we're not doing that. We have a big statewide event, and a whole bunch of people who have not been listened to for a whole year come, and they're like, hi, I have 12 months of anger that I need to unleash on you, right?
Right.
I'm like, valid, you know? Let's solve that problem. So stuff like this is part of how I want to solve that problem, you know? Okay, yeah, and we'll get to Made in Colorado in a bit.
Real quick on that topic, just as an inverted version of it, I've experienced the Northern Colorado gathering of folks, I guess, if you will, and through our openness and decision making, there is that separation in some groups that then will decide to completely break off because they don't feel like they're being represented in a certain way, and it's completely valid, no problem. But then trying to be like, hey, I get it, and can we get back in a room together and talk about the validation? And there's just sometimes like until we feel that you are doing things a certain way, we are not going to show up to have that conversation. So as folks that are experiencing this, and I know John, you and I have talked a lot, floating around the state and stuff like that, is there maybe a way, because I think that is one of many pillars we need to build, but it's one of the tougher ones.
Yeah.
Because I don't feel like we can have that big meeting because there's a bunch of folks that kind of think that those meetings aren't doing what they should for the greater good.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
I do. And let's stay with that for a second because that's super important, right?
Yeah.
Let's say everyone in Northern Colorado, everyone, but you all vote and you sort of say, this is going to be our spokesperson, our representative. Maybe it's your new regional film commissioner, maybe it's just the person who represents the Lyric and Horsetooth and all the independents, right? But everyone says this is our person, right? There's going to come a time, maybe it's on day one, where splinters start to, factions start to form, right? And so what do we do then? What are our mechanisms of being represented? What are our mechanisms of accountability, right? And it's not about, in my mind, whether someone's desire to splinter off and do their own thing is valid or not. It's where's that coming from and how do we address it, right? And so for me, I think if I could come to northern Colorado and know who the heads of the 5 families are, right? And know that those families have their houses in order to a certain extent, right? And if there's not a lot of democratic feedback at WIFMCO after every event, they say, how did this event go? Like, what can we do better, right? If those houses aren't in order with that kind of feedback, where they're always self-reforming and self-reflecting, right? It gets a little sclerotic and it starts to sort of die on the vine. Right? And so part of what we're talking about when we talk about community health are those practices and mechanisms by which we keep our own houses in order internally, so that when we are interacting externally with the other houses, right, there's full faith in our ability to be spokespeople, right, and our ability to work together. I know that sounds so vague and broad, but it's really like, who's your person up here? Now, when I go to Pueblo, I'm like, who should I talk to, right? And when they're not getting that support, that's where I'd love to see nonprofit arts organizations, but especially governmental organizations and agencies, offer some of that, like the neutral table, right? And asking your regional film commissioner, like, here's something we as a community need, right? We need openness and communication, we need transparency, but some kind of neutral entity. We initially thought Cine Fe might be that neutral entity, but the more Cine Fe grows, the more it becomes like a new house, right? And so I'm happy to serve that role to whatever extent I can, and sort of say, let's come in, let's do a mediated discussion. But more than anything, I think this is going to be the most John answer. It's about data. I need to be able to see people's disagreements, and I need to know that they've had the invitation to tell me where they disagree. Right? And so if all of us get into a better practice of data capture, we can start to make meaningful differences, because we're all talking in abstracts otherwise, right? Yeah. The loudest, angriest person is the loudest and angriest in my mind when I go to sleep at night, but they didn't necessarily represent the most popular view, right? Data allows me to tell the difference, and so feedback forums that I'm a huge fan of are a crucial part of that, I think. And if I didn't answer even a part of your question, I will be in the water.
No, there's some stuff I pulled out of that. More than anything, just as a added reminder to the film scene as abroad, is there is in our art forms, we are all being very expressive and very opinionated. So sometimes that does cross over in other people's opinions that then causes some riffraff within the scene, though we're all trying to express an art form. So sometimes you'll see like, well, I don't agree with what they're doing, but it's also like, on a broader scale, what are we speaking for? Are we fighting over who's saying it better, or are we fighting over the fact that we're trying to create art?
Yep.
So there's like a battle we need to win first before we can fight on that giant plane we've built about the little things sometimes.
Yeah.
Because I feel like a teaming up and coming together is almost more like a way we need to drop swords, because there's no way that we're going to be able to build the pyramid with 5 people.
Go ahead.
I was just saying, I mean, being up here for a year or two and slowly getting into the film scene, like, I think where we can help you too, Jesse, is that, you know, you've been a standalone sort of touch point for the industry up here for a long time, and like, I know that creates a lot of stress and a lot of pressure on you. And so, you know, we're here because we want everyone to feel more involved, and like, I live up here, so as a person who's in the industry and a part of WIFMCO, like, we're working hard to like form like not chapters, what are we calling them? Divisions in other regions, and I'm happy to take over as that person or to help you figure out how to do it, and we can have a specific conversation about people or what's going on and like, how do we resolve it. I'm happy to like be a part of that.
Yeah. I'm not trying to chase it down the hole. I think I think the answer is a mediator that's an outside source to get all those, like you said, the family heads to the table, so a conversation can be discussed on how to resolve this.
Yeah.
Well, I think the mediator needs to be the person that might be the one that's helping organize the statewide infrastructure.
Because they're an outside source. Yeah.
Well, and then there's also that respect, like, oh, you've built this way and you have the connections. Because when there isn't that, as we've discussed in Colorado, then people are going to be talking about, hey, how's the best way to go about that? People might be like, hey, I want this to be way more professional. Other people want it to be more inclusive and open and let the beginners come in, but then the more professional people aren't getting anything out of it anymore, and stuff like that. So it's, you know, biting one step forward, two steps back kind of thing. But like, I think if we, and my next question, if we want to lead into this, but sorry to hijack, but like, is to like, how do we get that central structure that can get people connected? Like, and I know that there's been efforts to kind of make it, and it goes, and then it goes away, but like, I don't know. I feel like if I was, as a production company, I would pay $500 a year more if I just knew that there was something that was there, and I knew that there was one person or a couple of people, a team, that was organizing it and kept it, and it showed up first on search results, and then it could connect with people. Like, I would pay for that.
Yeah.
Like, no questions asked, but like, I don't know who to pay. And I'm not the person, like, I want it, and I'm not somewhat organized, but I'm not, you know, the person to do it, but I don't know.
You're not the first. And we won't be the first to try it when we build it,
Yeah.
right? But when we build it, we want to know what's been tried in the past and why it didn't sustain, right? Why it didn't work. And this is the sort of online database question.
Yeah.
So, you know, you have different models, different potential models for it, and different potential models that have been tried. But the first thing I want to know, if we take that, if the community, let's say everyone in Northern Colorado, you all vote, you say online database, let's just do that first, right? First step is research. What's been tried? Right? There is a version where the state office does it, right? Film office or OED, right?
They have one.
There's an existing,
updating it.
right?
There's several versions of it.
Exactly.
We've attempted it, like you're pointing out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so, I suspect there are certain things that all of the attempts have in common, right? There was not a person for any of them who was solely in charge of that thing and just in charge of that thing, right? The person who's running the database and in charge of updating it and responding to inquiries and requests often has some other day job, right? Like being a film commissioner, or running a production company. And so those types of lessons are what we take to inform the design of what we're gonna build. But yeah, it's talk about low-hanging fruit of like, just build it and run it. How much money a year do we need to pay someone to, right? Find an intern, right?
Hannah.
Rana?
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, Hannah, sorry.
Hi. Out of curiosity, I'm sorry if you touched upon this before in your findings, but when you were kind of doing the research about some of the gaps, and when you were talking about, you know, some of that representation and the gaps in the representation, with BIPOC communities and women of color, did they, you know, can you talk about a little bit more about some of the dynamics behind that? Like, were they sort of macro level? Like, did they cite deeper, like, societal issues, or was it just more so examples of like interpersonal dynamics, something like that? I'm just curious about what those means. 'Cause sometimes there's certain things I'm like, I can't quite put my finger on it, because like people have been, you know, always been very warm and welcome, but at the same time there's just always something missing. But yeah, so I'm just curious about
And before you answer, can you repeat? Because I can't pick up her audio, I don't think so.
Sure,
Like, can you just repeat?
The question was about representation and what was the nature of the data that we saw, if I understand correctly. What was the nature of the data that we saw? How did that come through? So one was it showed up in the qualitative and the conversations and the interviews. And I can give you a lot more detail after the event too, just sharing sort of privately the types of comments that people shared. And then it showed up in the numbers. And the numbers, we had to make inferences based on demographic breakdown and like cross-tabbing with occupation.
Yes. Yes. The data that I used, so for instance, for a director, I was able to tell what percentage of the directors in Colorado were female or male, ethnicity, things like that. Spoiler alert, mostly white and male. So.
And you'd see something like the industry overall in Colorado is majority female. Didn't know that. But then you break it down to occupation. This funny thing happens. The higher paid the occupation, the more male it was, right?
Yeah.
Same with racial and ethnic demographics. And so there are lots and lots of ways that we can tackle it, and in my opinion, we have to tackle it in all of those ways simultaneously. One is bringing visibility to it, not as something that is like the weather, but instead as something that each of us, no matter how much or little power we have, that we have levers we can pull and buttons on our dashboard for how we open our doors to people who otherwise would be overlooked for certain opportunities. Right? The next, and the place where data gets fuzzy, right? It's in qualitative data, but it's in how people are treated in certain environments. Are you looked to, if you're a woman of color, are you looked to as an authority figure on set when something goes wrong, right? And if you're a white man, how often are you looked to as an authority figure, even when this is just your second time being a PA on the set? This type of stuff is harder to track and measure. It's vitally and urgently important to address if we want our industry and our storytelling world to look anything like the people in our state. Right? Yeah, that stuff drives me crazy. And then there's large-scale systemic programs that we can actually run as well, and that other states have tried. So California and Pacific Northwest have created reporting programs for certain types of behavior on set. Yeah. No, that's good. Go to the next slide. Yeah, these questions will be guiding the conversation we just had. And these are the kind of the key things that we do want to know. But yeah, there's a lot that can be done. And if you check out the study and look at that section and have more questions, just come to me, like reach out.
And where can you find the study? Just real quick.
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you asked. cinefe.org/study. There's some consolation in the fact that Colorado's not the only place with those issues, but it doesn't let us off the hook.
It was surprising looking at different states and the nation as a whole. It was pretty similar. It was shocking, but not really that shocking.
Ron, did you have a question?
Yes and no. So I'm Ronna Burrows. I live in Wheat Ridge, and over the years, from about 2017, I would go to luncheons and town halls and say, how about developing film? And the first initial bit after 2014, the legislature was loath to do anything with film. I'm not giving money to film for anything. And so I thought, how can I change this? I'm just one little old lady, what can I do? So I took on the idea that we send greeting cards twice a year to our legislators. And from that, we're not doing it ever, we now have people who supported this last film bill. And the way that they did it was that they heard from their constituents. And so October is now, and every October and every July, we send a greeting card to the Capitol, to their office in the Capitol. How about developing film, is all you have to say. Or you can add things about your story, your experiences, what film would do for you in the state. But what has happened over those intervening years is that we did get a legislator to write the bills, or to sponsor the initial submission of the bill to the House. That's Leslie Herod, who's in Denver. But we need a new champion coming forward because she's in her last term. And I went to a luncheon 2 weeks ago with House Minority Leader Mike Lynch, and he lives in Wellington. So he may be your legislator. And he took great pride in telling me that he voted for the last bill, where 5 years ago, they not only wouldn't vote for it, they'd stomp it on the ground and spit on it. So Mike Lynch may be your legislator. He's up for this. He's a House Minority Leader. I went to the town hall, and you guys should all figure out your town hall, get on their list, and they will have a town hall. And you can go and just afterwards say, how about developing film? And you can talk with your legislator if it's not Mike Lynch. But the town hall I went to, before I said anything, and I said, well, I wanted to talk about film, they said, oh, we voted for that bill, instead of 5 years ago, or they'd stomp and spit on it. So the interactions for the state film incentives are happening. It was $5 million, there was asked for 15, but to get 5 restores where the film office or the state was spending before they cut the before they cut the funding to 750,000. So we're at that, and what we need to do now, and is only my vision. I don't pretend to know how or what you guys do, but to ask for multiple year funding instead of 1 year funding every year, and to expand the budget and have it expand as results are seen in terms of how many local by that I mean state movies, state TV shows, state things run by you guys in the state, not that the government puts these on, but that you guys put them on. And that as we expand from your local productions, that we can expand to where we can get to a place where we can build sound stages. And so right now that doesn't help you, but that's my plan for the future. And whatever we can do to help you in the short term is important. One of the other things that I have advocated for is dropping the $100,000 spend for local filmmakers to $50,000, and that the local people would submit 3 years of rent or mortgage receipts so they can prove they're not Californians coming in using their cousin Paul's address in Aurora, who's a plumber, and say, yes, I'm a local, but that way we can prove that, not get carpetbagged. So the things that I need for you to do this month is to go to the grocery store, King Soopers, Safeway, have greeting cards. There's stamps at checkout at King Soopers. I think you have to go to the service center at Safeway. Get 4 greeting cards and stamps. Address them to your state representative, your state senator, the Joint Budget Committee, and the governor's office. And you send them all to the Capitol building, which is 200 East Colfax, Denver, Colorado, 80203. But that's where you send them. And say, how about developing film? Here's my story. Because we've got enough people now that the legislators say, yeah, this is a really good thing. And by your saying, I'm a constituent, I'm a stakeholder, I've got a skin in the game, they're more likely to pay attention and more likely to want to expand film and maybe do some special things, some things that John spoke about. And so where are you going? King Soopers, Safeway. What are you gonna do? You're gonna get 4 greeting cards. Well, if you can only get 2, get 2. Get stamps. They're at the checkout at King Soopers, and send them to the state capitol building. Find your legislator at colorado.gov. Find my legislator and send them. And if you get them to Mike Lynch, man, that'd be terrific. That's if he's your guy. If he's not your guy, send it to your guy or
Awesome.
gal.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So Rana, Jesse, Maya, all people who are excellent to talk to in terms of they've built their own avenues of organizing, of getting stuff done. And as we said, like the Arts to Live program now exists because of Maya's lobbying here in Fort Collins. And so you have wisdom and resources in the room already based on the types of advocacy you want to do for the types of issues that are most important to you. Where I'm coming from it as an organizer is speaking with one voice. So I think all of us here, I wish the film office would do this, or I wish my statewide or municipal arts agency would do that, right? And what I generally do is I say, when you went to them with your entire organization, or with 100 signatures, or with 200 signatures saying, we all want this one thing, we are speaking with one voice, what was their response, right? In general, we skip the hard part when we want change. We just go straight and darken someone's doorway. And we overestimate, I think the phrase is, we overestimate what we can do in 1 year and underestimate what we can do in 5. And we also underestimate what we can do with 500 people. And so building consensus regionally, or however you define your community, right? It doesn't have to be geographic or regional, but that makes you so powerful. Like, it's one thing when the legislator, it just needs you to leave their office. It's another thing when the legislator keeps running into dozens and dozens of people saying the same thing over and over again, right? And so are we speaking with one voice? So my recommendations for next steps would be at the regional level, building consensus, identifying leadership, right? and doing that communication with one voice. First, that's communication to other regions and to our state film office and to the powers that be statewide. And then having those statewide leaders be responsible for next steps as well, right? In an ideal world, like a regional leader from every region of the state would know all the other regional leaders and be working in close, sort of like, here's what we need in Fort Collins, here's what we need in Southern Colorado. Here's the overlap. Boom, we've got a priority. Let's knock that out in 2024, right? We do have Ariel at the film office who's doing the Lord's work, including building out regional film offices, sort of identifying and training some really fantastic people from around the state. Elizabeth, do you happen to know who Fort Collins is regional?
I am the person that's spearheading the Northern Colorado Film Commission. So right now, I'm just planning like Larimer, Weld, like kind of all of it up here until it gets big and needs to break into pieces. But in our little survey, the QR code, there's a place for you to put your name and your email so that I can then reach out to put you on it. 'Cause each commissioner is supposed to have a website where someone can go, oh, I want to film in this area of Colorado. They go to that website and then they see crew that works there, locations for that place, all of the good things. So that is in the works as well.
Cool. So cool.
Like Julie Spear Jackson just did Chaffee County. So there's other ones that are popping up. So
Really impressive people doing really much needed work. So we have leadership in the room, and really competent leadership. People will, after an event like this, they'll be like, you know, what are the next steps? What are we doing next? What do you want, right? So if by the end of the year, Fort Collins' regional film commissioner knows Pueblo's regional film commissioner, and they've talked, and they are, like, they both feel informed about their own communities and what their communities have said, and they find the overlap between their two communities, that's huge. Like, that's a very good milestone for me, as far as I'm concerned, right? But I want that statewide collaboration so that right hands know what left hands are doing before we try to start getting stuff done together. That's exciting. That would be great.
we had one other portion of this where we were gonna have a couple people from the community tell us about what they're doing up here. We have a few minutes left, right, Maya? So Kate, do you wanna just chat for a second about your organization, your group that you have? You can come on up here.
Yeah.
Kate Stala.
Yeah.
Come on down.
Hi everyone, my name's Kate Stala. There's a chair there. I run the blog Film and NoCo. Basically what I do is I cyber stalk every single film event in the area and try to make sure that they're all on one big collected calendar. And then I'm trying to expand it into more of a news publication also. So like if you have a press release and you don't know how to write, or if you have news and you don't want to write a press release, tell me please. And then like it's content. Content is king. And one of the things I'm just trying to do with it is reach everyone in Northern Colorado's film community. So I like to travel all around. You know, there's a filmmaker meetup that happens down in Longmont, you know, and I hardly ever see people from Fort Collins go down there, so I make sure I go down there and make sure, you know, both sides know what's going on. There's people who, you know, put on movie premieres at the Cress in East Greeley, and the Cress is a beautiful theater, but it feels like everything in Northern Colorado's film community is focused on the Lyric, and the Lyric is also a really cool thing. But we also have the Cress, we have the Rialto. Everything in Northern Colorado's film community seems focused on like Facebook and Instagram, you know, but what about old people who only use the internet through email? You know, I want to make sure to include them in the film community. What about, you know, I'm not learning TikTok dances though. But, you know, I want to make sure that we include as many people as possible in our film community, not just, you know, the people who have Monday nights free, you know, can stay out till 11 on a school night. So thank you for letting me plug my blog.
Thank you so much for being here.
Follow Film and NoCo on
Film and
Instagram or
NoCo.
Facebook or anywhere.
Thank you so much.
Alright, and then Jesse, can you give us a little Horsetooth International Film Festival update real quick? And then we'll continue chatting out in the lobby, because I believe there's a movie in here soon.
Yeah. Heck yeah. Well, I run, own, and
direct the Horsetooth International Film Festival, or we go by Horsetooth Fest now, because we're trying to be a multimedia event, because that's what this area has, is hundreds of different styles of art, so we're trying to include that, and that's all part of the whole growth together that we like to do. Year 5 was great, always is a crazy time, but we had just as many people as we've had in the past. We had a lot of crazy, really awesome films, and a lot of it was locally curated. A lot of films from this area were in the festival this year, which is awesome. They actually knocked out a lot of international films because they were so good. So we're doing pretty good here. HIF has a lot of growing pains because it is a festival growing in an area that doesn't quite have the incentives that we're talking about, and I definitely do not come from a money of any kind, and or have like a massive producer or backer in that. So it's always a struggle to try to find funding. So the only thing I asked for a little bit is this year we're going to go into year 6. We're going to try to make it more of a community organized thing. I mean, it's trying to be that way, but now I'm just trying to open it up to the community, be like, hey, what do you all want this festival to become? And kind of bring you all in to help that get in that direction. Some parts that I do need help with, because I've heard it enough times, and I just gotta lay the stinking pen and calculator down, but I'm not an admin guy. I am a visionary that is trying to do admin, and it is insane for people that do admin. They're like, what is this guy talking about? I'm like, here's everything. It's just not good. So if you are an admin or want to work in sales and all those little like to have those meetings and stuff like that, come talk to me. I can tell you the entire insane idea to go out and sell and buy and all that stuff. Outside of that, making it a community organized event where everybody feels like it is their thing. Like, you're coming to the festival saying, this is my festival, this is our festival. I'm the owner operator. I don't really care. Like, literally, I try to be humble about it. Really the only selfish thing about the film festival is the fact that, like you had mentioned, we are trying to figure out a way to get our work in front of people. So clearly the biggest next step, outside of just having showcases on a Wednesday night, is having an international film festival that allows for a lot of people to come together and shake hands, which is awesome and a great time. Another echo of that is that over the next year and a half, through the next growthing period of Horsetooth, is that we're going to be having monthly showcases that highlight filmmakers specifically that are kind of growing at a massive scale, to try to bring in incentive people and people that have a little bit of funding or whatever. So we're working towards these like rooms that are kind of a town hall situation. So if you're interested or know folks who want to be involved in that, or if you want to be involved with that, it takes nothing to just show up and just watch movies, because all we need is your eyeballs. Just like, what is it? What's going on next?
Arboretum.
Oh no, it's